My name is Clara Bennett, and I'm 31 years old. Up until that Thursday evening, I thought that changing the Yale lock on the front door would be enough to keep my overbearing parents completely out of our lives and protect the peace of our little family. I couldn't have been more wrong. That day I picked up my 6-year-old daughter Layla from St. Mary's Primary School and drove my Ford Fiesta home along the quiet Surrey Lane, turning into our terraced house driveway, when I spotted their silver Vauxhall insignia parked across the street. My dad Robert and my mum Margaret sat inside like two wax statues, not waving, not getting out. They just waited there until I stared in shock at the ribbon-tied gift box on the doorstep. Then they started the engine and glided away without a sound, not even a flicker of their brake lights. The box had a crumpled note tied to the ribbon, covered in my dad's scrawling handwriting that looked like a doctor's prescription: "Don't make a scene. It's all for your own good." I should have treated it like junk mail and thrown it in the recycling, but that phrase had been their decree for as long as I could remember: not to be argued with, not to be questioned. I carried the box inside the hallway and cut the ribbon. The first thing I saw made my stomach clench: a stealthily taken photo of Layla sleeping in her bedroom, shot from an odd angle, clearly taken through the gap in the garden fence. Underneath lay our spare house key and a small USB stick with a blinking red light. Beneath those two items was a thick brown envelope stamped with the gold-embossed logo of Kingsland Norton Family Law. My legs went weak and I nearly collapsed on the hall carpet. Without even reading the documents, I dialed 999. Within 8 minutes 2 officers arrived, young P.C. Harris and the world-weary Sergeant Blakely. They carefully sorted through every item in the package, told me not to touch any more evidence, and Sergeant Blakely's frown grew deeper by the second. Just then my husband Leo pushed the door open. He's a compliance manager at a fintech firm in London, usually smartly dressed and presentable, but when he saw the uniformed officers and the spread of surprises all over the coffee table, he went pale as if someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over his head. "Don't tell me." His voice trembled. "They actually went through with it." That frightened me more than the photos. He clearly knew something and had kept it from me all along. Before I tell you what the officers found under those legal documents, and why Leo looked like he'd seen a ghost, I want to ask you on the other side of the screen, what time is it where you are? Where are you reading this? What's the weather like outside your window? I'm genuinely curious how far this saga of suffocating family drama will travel. Leo had barely finished speaking when both officers turned to stare at him, and I was boring holes into his face with my eyes too. For several seconds he stood there helpless, not daring to look at me or at the evidence-covered package. Finally he pointed at the solicitor's envelope and rasped, Has anyone opened the documents inside?" Sergeant Blakely shook his head. Leo's Adam's apple bobbed and he confessed in a low voice, 4 weeks ago, your dad cornered me outside my office, Canary Wharf, in broad daylight. He pulled out a document and asked me to sign it, saying it was an emergency guardianship agreement in case both of us were hospitalized and nobody could look after Layla. I refused on the spot. I stared at him, my head buzzing. He hadn't mentioned a word of this to me. Leo stammered his explanation, saying Robert had been wearing a Burberry trench coat, and spoke as casually as if discussing car insurance. When Leo pressed him for why he needed the document, Robert trotted out Margaret's line, that I was emotionally unstable, and they needed the legal paperwork, just in case. Leo told them outright to keep their noses out of our family's business. Robert just curled his lip and gave a cold laugh. "That's not for you to decide." Leo chose to keep it from me, saying he was afraid that telling me would only rip open the old scars I'd spent years trying to heal. I wanted to explode at him, but the package laid out on the coffee table was bloody proof that his silence had handed my parents the perfect weapon. Sergeant Blakely pulled on latex gloves and began to sift through the contents under the solicitor's envelope. First a miniature voice recorder with a standby green light, then a 32 gigabytes USB labeled backup_Margaret, then 6 photos, all of Layla, some showing her in school uniform feeding squirrels in the garden, others of her pushing a mini trolley in the supermarket, and one taken through the wire fence of the primary school playground, with dates spanning a full 7 weeks. As the sergeant turned over the last photo, his finger paused. In the reflection of a glass window, half a face was visible. Neither Margaret nor Robert. It was a stranger in a baseball cap, with a sharp jawline and a smirk that made my skin crawl. Next came Layla's wooden toy train, a Thomas the Tank Engine, blue, with mud from the back garden still on the wheels, and a plush rabbit I recognized instantly, with a crooked L stitched on its ear. Layla had lost that rabbit 4 months ago, after a visit to my parents' house. At the time I'd just assumed she'd misplaced it and thought nothing of it. The moment the sergeant picked up the rabbit, a strong scent of white musk mixed with ylang ylang hit me. The Jo Malone fragrance my mother Margaret always wore, the same scent that used to linger in the hallway outside my bedroom door when she'd eavesdrop on me. My mind snapped back to when I was 18. Hiding my UCAS application form under my mattress, because Margaret had already filled out a local Surrey University application for me and forbidden me from applying anywhere outside London. The full memory was blurry now, but I remembered the suffocating tightness in my chest, the soft turn of the doorknob, and her ice-cold question, why would a daughter who loves her family keep secrets? The photos were bad enough, but what made Sergeant Blakely immediately phone his superior was the rabbit's left ear. A neat cut had been made in the fabric, and inside was a miniature GPS tracker. He held it up and looked at me, his tone completely changed. Mrs. Bennett, this is far beyond a simple family dispute. I need to call in the criminal investigation team. As he radioed for backup, Leo stumbled into the kitchen and fished a crumpled courier envelope out of the bin. His face was even whiter than before, and his voice came out through clenched teeth. This package, it was sent using my company's courier account. Robert borrowed my account details last month, said he needed to send some documents for his firm. The old fox, he's been using me as a pawn from the start. Just then my phone rang. The screen lit up with my mother Margaret's number. My hand trembling, I pressed speaker and heard her voice, as gentle and chillingly warm as ever. Clara, darling. You got the package, didn't you? Don't be alarmed, it's just a precautionary measure. Oh, and Layla's school open day next week. Your father and I have already spoken to the head teacher. We'll be attending on your behalf. After all, how could we trust a daughter who's kept secrets for so many years to keep raising a child properly? She paused, then added with a laugh, oh, and the young man who took those photos for you, he's a friend of your father's. A retired MI5 technical consultant. Very professional. Aren't we just so for your own good? The moment she hung up, Leo slammed his fist on the kitchen counter, PC Harris reached for his handcuffs, and Sergeant Blakely was already dialing Surrey Police's major incident unit. I stared at the evidence spread across the coffee table, the reflection of the stranger's half-face, the GPS tracker, the voice recorder, the solicitor's letter, and suddenly I laughed. Slowly I got up, took a document from the drawer, and slapped it onto the table. It was the application for a restraining order I'd had my solicitor draft 3 months earlier, with me as the applicant and Robert and Margaret Bennett as the respondents, on grounds of long-term emotional abuse and unlawful surveillance. I'd never sent it, because I'd always felt it wasn't quite time. But today, it finally had its purpose. Sergeant Blakely, I heard myself say, as calmly as if ordering takeaway, please file this as supplementary evidence. Anne, I want to formally report my parents for stalking, unlawful surveillance, and endangering a child. As for this friend from MI5, I picked up the reflection photo and raised an eyebrow at the sergeant. He'd better really be retired, because I'm planning to sue him too. Outside, the Surrey dusk was pressing down, and the sound of sirens grew closer. Leo stood beside me, his lips moving as if to speak, but I held up a hand to stop him. We'll settle your account later. But right now, I'm going to show them that the secret-keeping daughter is no longer that 18-year-old girl crying under her mattress. The voice recorder on the coffee table suddenly blinked a red light. My mother Margaret had apparently forgotten to turn off the remote listening function. I bent down, put my mouth close to the microphone, and said in the sweetest voice, enunciating each word, "Did you hear that, Mum? Welcome to my game." 3 hours later, the major crime team's officers had removed the last box of evidence, and the living room was left with just me and Leo and a circle of dusty chalk marks on the coffee table. Sergeant Blakely patted my shoulder before leaving, saying they'd get a search warrant overnight, and first thing tomorrow they'd be paying a visit to my parents' Georgian house in Weybridge. I thanked him, closed the door, and turned round to see Leo leaning against the kitchen door frame, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the floor like a golden retriever that had been kicked. "I know you want to yell at me," he said. I didn't have the energy to yell anymore. Layla was asleep upstairs. Next-door neighbor Mrs. Diana had watched her for 3 hours, and as she left, had whispered in a voice loud enough for the whole street to hear, "Mrs. Bennett, your parents' car was parked at the end of the lane for 40 minutes this afternoon. I saw it clear as day." Everyone in Surrey knew that silver Vauxhall. Robert never parked it in the garage. He liked everyone to know he'd arrived. "I'm not going to fight with you tonight," I said, "but that doesn't mean this is over. You kept this from me for a month, Leo. An entire month. You know what my father is like. You know what my mother is capable of, and you chose to let me face their trap empty-handed. I need to think about what that means." He opened his mouth, but only managed a sorry. I didn't reply. I went upstairs, locked the bedroom door, and lay down next to Layla, watching her little face breathing evenly. Her eyelashes were long, like her father's, but that stubborn streak was all mine. 6 years old, and she'd already picked fights with older boys at school to defend her friends. I gently brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and thought, no matter what, this person must never be taken by Robert and Margaret under that for-your-own-good nonsense. At 7 the next morning, Sergeant Blakely's phone call jolted me out of a shallow sleep. He said the search warrant had been granted and his team had already been round. My mother had opened the door in her dressing gown, grey hair immaculately brushed, her expression unchanged as if she were greeting the milkman. Robert sat in the dining room reading the Times, with a full silver tea service in front of him, like a man waiting for a play he already knew was coming. The officers found more. A signal receiver disguised as an irrigation controller in the garden shed, 7 different drafts of guardianship applications in Robert's study drawer, the earliest dated a full year ago. Most damning of all, they'd recovered over 300 text messages from Margaret's phone, sent to a contact labeled F, containing Layla's daily schedule, my office address, Leo's business flight numbers, and the phrase, "The time is approaching," repeated countless times. Blakely paused on the phone, using that dry police tone, "Mrs. Bennett, I think you should know that the messages concerning your husband Leo, your mother appears to have identified his weak point very early. She says your father has infiltrated Leo's work circle. Does that mean anything to you?" I walked to the window with my phone and saw Leo standing in the back garden, still in yesterday's shirt, sleeves rolled up, clutching a cold cup of tea, and staring blankly at the fence. His office was a 40-minute drive from town. It was Friday, he should have left ages ago. He hadn't moved. "No idea," I said, "but I'll find out." When I went downstairs after hanging up, Leo turned at the sound of the door. His eyes were shadowed. He'd clearly not slept all night. Before I could say anything, he spoke. Your dad sent an email to my CEO 4 days ago. Using my company account. I stopped walking. Alleging that I took bribes from a supplier, with a forged transfer record attached, he said flatly. The CEO called me in, said internal audit would be launched, but they'd hold off reporting it this week. I thought I could sort it out myself, which is why I didn't tell you. He put the cup on the garden table and turned to face me. Clara, your father isn't just after guardianship. He wants to destroy me. Uproot me from your life entirely. Then he can tell a judge with a straight face, your husband has financial problems, your little family's foundations are shaky, Layla needs a more stable environment. I stood there, the sliding door from the living room to the garden open, the cold October morning air rushing in and chilling the back of my neck. I suddenly remembered the voice recorder from last night's package, and Margaret's line, "That's not for you to decide." She wasn't saying Leo couldn't decide. She was saying Leo himself shouldn't exist. Do you have proof that email wasn't from you? I asked. Yes. I was in a client meeting that afternoon. The conference room CCTV caught me. He paused and gave a bitter laugh. But the audit process will take at least 2 weeks. My access will be frozen during that time. Losing my year-end promotion would be a minor issue if he leaks this publicly. Clara, my industry runs on trust. I walked slowly over and stood in front of him. Half a meter of air and a heap of unspoken lies lay between us. I reached out, took the cold tea from his hand and put it on the table, then said, "Fine. Then we'll prepare an email for them too. Can you get your CEO to meet today?" He blinked, then nodded. And I said, "That courier account you lost, have you changed the password?" "Did it last night." "Good. Send Robert one line, 'Dad, your courier account has been closed. Next time you want to send something, use Royal Mail, and make sure you put enough stamps on it. Sign it from me." Leo stared at me for a few seconds, then laughed, a half-relieved kind of laugh. As I turned to go inside and make Layla's breakfast, I heard him say behind me, "Clara. Yeah. I'll never keep anything from you again." I didn't look back, but I said, "I'll trust you this once." After dropping Layla at school, I drove straight to Canary Wharf. Leo's CEO was a man named Hutchinson, in his 50s, from Newcastle, with a strong northern accent. There were only 3 of us in the meeting room. I laid out my side of things, the package, the photos, the GPS, the retired MI5 consultant, as objectively and calmly as possible, like reading a list of evidence to a jury. Hutchinson listened in silence for half a minute, then projected the fake email onto the big screen. "Forgery is obvious in the header," he said, circling a few spots with a laser pointer. "Internal emails normally go through our own Exchange server. This one bounced through 3 overseas relays. Our tech team flagged it yesterday. The reason I didn't close the case right away was to see who this thing was going to pull out of the woodwork." He glanced at Leo. "Leo's worked for me for 7 years. I know his character. But when someone tries to use this sort of tactic, I have to play the game out first." "And have you seen enough now?" I asked. Hutchinson switched off the projector and leaned back. "Mrs. Bennett, your husband's position and salary remain unchanged. The audit will be announced externally as completed with no issues. One more thing." He pulled a business card from his drawer and slid it over. "This is an old police contact of mine, now in the NCA's cybercrime unit. If your parents really hired a retired MI5 man, then what he does off the books and whether it's legal, this person knows far more than the local force." I put the card in my bag, thanked him, and as Leo walked me downstairs, we were alone in the lift. He suddenly spoke, "When you said we in that meeting, I I thought you'd have packed up and left with Layla last night. I did think about it, I said. But Layla loves this house, loves Mrs. Diana's carrot cake next door, loves the apple tree in the back garden. I'm not letting them take that away too. He reached out to touch my shoulder, but I stepped half a step aside. Leo, you still owe me. But I'm giving you a chance to pay it back. You understand the difference, right? He nodded, and the lift doors opened. On the way back from Canary Wharf, I got another call from Sergeant Blakely, saying there had been more progress. Robert had been brought in for questioning, with a solicitor present throughout, answering everything with no comment. But Margaret had slipped up. During her interview she claimed she didn't remember anyone called F, but officers had found a hidden folder on her phone containing 37 audio recordings, all of my phone conversations. I had no idea when or how she'd recorded them. Possibly through the landline, possibly my old phone had been bugged. Blakely said the earliest recording dated back 4 years, when Layla was 2. I pulled over, rested my forehead on the steering wheel, and took 3 deep breaths to calm myself. 4 years ago. I'd just returned to work after maternity leave, and she'd come over twice a week to help with Layla, calling it giving a young mum a hand. Each visit she'd bring a flask of soup, and before leaving she'd tidy my living room bookshelves. Back then I thought I was lucky to have a mother who, though controlling, was at least willing to pitch in. When she stood at the bookshelf going through my things, her fingers probably touched more than just book spines. That afternoon when I picked up Layla, there were clusters of parents chatting outside the school gate. As I walked over, I overheard murmured talk about the Bennets. That's sorry for you, if someone's bin lid isn't shut properly, the whole town knows within hours. 2 mothers I barely knew fell silent as I approached, and one of them, Fiona, came over with a forced smile. Clara. Are you free this weekend? We're having a Halloween party, the kids can make pumpkins together. I knew she was fishing, but her child was one of Layla's best friends, and I couldn't poison Layla's social circle. So I said yes, and then, in front of her, I pulled out my phone and sent a formal email to Layla's head teacher, copied to the headmaster and the board of governors, notifying the school that my parents Robert and Margaret Bennett had been placed on a restricted contact list, and were not to have any form of contact or communication with Layla without my written authorization. Within 3 minutes, the head teacher's reply came, received and entered into the system. Mrs. Bennett, please let us know if you need anything. Fiona's eyes flickered. She clearly understood the seriousness, and didn't press further, instead saying she'd bake extra cupcakes for Layla. People in this town are gossipy, but they have their limits. That evening, after bath time, stories, and getting Layla to sleep, I sat alone in the study and opened my laptop. Blakely's tech team had made a mirror copy of the USB and sent it to me, so I plugged in my backup drive and started going through it. The USB was full of folders labeled by year and month, dating back 5 years. Each folder contained photos and audio files, arranged with greater precision than my work calendar. I opened the most recent month, and saw candid shots of Layla stretching up for sweets in the supermarket, a video of her playing a xylophone in music class, and a shot of the back of my head as I crouched to tie my shoelace while we fed ducks in the park. At the deepest level of the folder structure, I found a PDF labeled F report. I opened it. It was a psychological assessment of me, authored by one Alistair Fletcher, whose title read, Behavioral Analysis and Risk Assessment Consultant, dated the previous Wednesday. The assessment's conclusion was bolded. Subject Bennett, née Thompson, Clara displays moderate anxiety tendencies, and an avoidant attachment pattern, and under sudden custodial stress, may not possess stable parenting capacity. 3 pages of so-called clinical basis followed, all extracted from recordings of my conversations with my parents over the past 5 years. The angry outbursts I'd had during arguments, muttered monologues after hanging up, the occasional, I can't cope, I'd said to Leo. I took a screenshot of that page, attached it to a brief email, and sent it to the NCA contact Hutchinson had given me, copying in Sergeant Blakely. The body of the email read, "I reserve all rights to pursue legal action regarding the legality of this Mr. Fletcher's activities." After sending it, I closed the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and closed my eyes for a while. The whole house was quiet. The kitchen tap dripped occasionally. Layla turned over upstairs, and then came the sound of a car driving past in the distance. I opened my eyes, went to the window, and lifted a corner of the blinds. Under the street lamp, next to the plane tree across the road, a dark blue Ford Focus was parked, engine still running, tail lights glowing a dull red. It was hard to see inside, but there was someone in the driver's seat. I didn't panic. I went to the hallway, grabbed a torch, walked out to the front garden, stood under the porch light, and aimed the beam directly at the car. After 5 seconds, the Focus pulled away and drove off slowly, without even accelerating. I memorized the first 3 letters of the number plate, went back inside, and texted Blakely. Someone was watching my house just now. Number plate, GX67 prefix, dark blue Focus. Blakely replied immediately, received. I'll have the traffic cameras checked tomorrow morning. Lock your doors, keep your child safe, and don't open any windows tonight. I didn't reply. I put my phone on the bedside table, laid a blanket on the floor of Layla's room, and lay down. A nightlight on the ceiling cast a starry shadow. Layla's breathing was steady and even. I stared at the slowly rotating stars and thought, now that this game has started, I can't be the one to call timeout first. Saturday came. Layla woke up in the morning, saw me sleeping on her floor, and was both surprised and delighted. She pounced on my chest and asked if I'd had a nightmare. I said, "Mummy just wanted to be with you." She believed me, hugged my neck, and said, "Then let's make pancakes together today." I said yes and took her hand downstairs. Halfway through making pancakes, the doorbell rang. Leo answered it and came back with a complicated expression, holding an unstamped letter on thick paper with neatly trimmed edges. He handed it to me. The envelope read Clara, personal, in my mother's handwriting. I washed my hands, opened it, and found only a card inside. On the front was a watercolor painting, a little house, an apple tree in front, 2 adults and a child standing on the lawn. On the back, my mother's elegant cursive flowed. "Darling, when you said welcome to my game on the phone the other day, it broke my heart. When you were little and played house, I always helped you put your toys away, made your dinner, read your bedtime story. Games always end, and children must eventually return to reality. Your reality should contain no fear, no resistance, only a mother who loves you more than anything. Your father and I will never give up on you, never. When you're calm, come home and have some soup. I've made your favorite pumpkin cream soup. Love, Mum." I read the card 3 times over, then walked to the kitchen sink, turned on the garbage disposal, shredded the card, and dropped it in, switching it on. Amid the roar, Leo and Layla both looked up. I turned it off and smiled at them. Pancakes are ruined. Let's start over. That afternoon I took Layla to Fiona's Halloween party. A bunch of kids in colorful costumes were chasing each other around the backyard. Layla was dressed as a ladybird, with glowing LED lights sewn onto her wings. Every time she ran, she looked like a tiny, multicolored shooting star. Fiona's husband Gary was flipping burgers by the barbecue. He caught my eye and said quietly, "Mrs. Bennett, there was an old man standing at the street corner this morning, looking this way with binoculars." I told him to leave. He didn't argue, just looked at me and walked off. Silver gray hair, wearing a dark green Barber jacket. Robert. He wears that jacket whenever he goes to the garden. I thanked Gary and said I'd handle it. Then I walked to the far end of the garden to text Blakely. When I finished, Layla came running up, tugged my sleeve, and looked up. "Mum, what about Grandma? She always made me spider biscuits for Halloween." I crouched down to her eye level and looked at her seriously. She was 6, but she could already tell when adults were fobbing her off. I said, "Grandma and Mummy have a little disagreement at the moment, so she won't be coming for a while. But it's not your fault, and it's nothing to do with you. Layla, just remember, no matter what happens, Mummy and Daddy will protect you. If Grandma or Grandpa ever come to you, no matter what they say, the first person you must go to is a teacher at school, or a police officer. Got it?" Layla blinked, then handed me her little plastic pumpkin and said, "Then you can have my sweets, so you won't be sad." I picked her up and buried my face in her soft curls, murmuring okay. At the party I chatted with the other parents as much as politeness required, laughing and making small talk. In the middle of it, I glanced at my phone and saw that the NCA had replied, saying Fletcher was in their database. He had been listed as an independent security consultant 3 years ago, but held no practicing license. His assessment report had no legal standing, and collecting conversations without consent violated both the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act and the Data Protection Act under UK law. The email ended with, "If you decide to prosecute, we can provide technical support." I took a screenshot and saved it to an encrypted folder I'd named Counter-Strike. We got back from the party just before 9. Layla fell asleep in the car. Leo carried her upstairs to bed. I spent half an hour in the living room organizing the day's information, then heard Leo coming downstairs, holding a courier envelope, a genuine Royal Mail delivery, with a proper postmark. He said he'd found it on the doormat just now. The postman must have rung while we were out at the party. I opened it. Inside was a sheaf of printed bank statements for Robert Bennett's personal account, covering the past 6 months. I didn't know who'd sent it. The sender's address line only said S, no full name. A highlighter marked several transfers of between £2,000 and £5,000 each, with the payee listed as Fletcher Associated Consulting. The most recent transaction dated last Friday, the same day the police had come to my house. "Your dad is paying that assessor," Leo said, standing behind me and looking at the statements. "More than that," I said, flipping to the last page. "Look here. There's a transfer of £8,000, no payee name, just an IBAN, with equipment purchase in the reference. Dated 3 days before Layla's rabbit was lost." Leo swore. I took a photo of that page with my phone and sent it to Blakely and the NCA. Then I put the statements away and looked at Leo. His color was still off, but his eyes were steadier than a couple of days ago. "Leo, I need to go and see someone tomorrow," I said. "Whoever sent this, they've done me a huge favor. I need to find out who S is and what else they have. I'll come with you." "No. You stay home and watch Layla. You still owe me, pay that one back first." He hesitated, then nodded. The next morning I left at 7 and followed the postal information on the envelope to the sorting office for the sending area. The staff checked and said the parcel had been dropped into a street postbox in Guildford 2 days earlier. There was no CCTV. Half the lead was gone, but on my way home I got a call from an unknown number. A male voice, middle-aged, gentle, with a slight Scottish accent. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, "my name is Strachan. I sent those bank statements. I think we should meet." My grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Why are you helping me?" "Because your father Robert Bennett fired me 3 years ago," he said. "I was his finance director for 15 years. He pinned a fraud on me to cover up an irregular offshore trust payment. I lost the case, lost my savings, but I kept a copy of the evidence. I've been waiting for the right time to use it. When I saw the news about police at his house, I knew the time had come. You want me to help you overturn your case? No. I've already found another use for that evidence. He paused. I wanted to warn you, your father has an offshore trust account with a substantial war chest for legal battles. The part you can trace is over £400,000. If he decides to fight you for custody, he can outlast you financially. You need to be prepared. I was silent for a few seconds. Then let's meet in person. 2 o'clock this afternoon, the old bookshop's upstairs tea room opposite Guildford Station. I'll be in a grey suit, carrying a copy of Crime and Punishment. At 2 I arrived. The tea room had only a few occupied tables. Strachan sat by the window, his book indeed open halfway. He looked to be in his 50s, lean-faced, with sharp eyes. After I sat down, he didn't waste time on pleasantries. He pulled a slim folder from his briefcase and slid it over, containing a handwritten note with the key points of the trust: opening date, amount, trustee details. The trustee was a Luxembourg law firm, and the beneficiaries, apart from Robert and Margaret themselves, included one further line: under certain conditions, Layla Bennett. What are those certain conditions? I asked. Strachan raised his teacup and said, Robert mentioned it to me in passing the year I left. He said, future guardianship arrangements need to be synchronized with the financial safety net. I didn't think much of it at the time, but looking back, he may have been treating Layla as part of some asset allocation strategy. I looked over the page several times, folded it, and put it in my bag. Thank you, Mr. Strachan. I owe you one. No need, he said, closing his book and standing up. Just don't lose. He left, and I sat in the tea room for a while longer. Outside, Guildford's streets were quiet and ordinary under the grey October sky. Pedestrians hurried by in their coats, a red bus pulled in and then pulled away. The world was functioning normally, unaware that a few miles away, in a large house, someone was using £400,000 to plan a war for my daughter. I took out my phone and texted Sergeant Blakely, Trust Info. I'll come to the station tonight to give a full statement. Also, can you look up a Luxembourg law firm name? I'll send it to you. Blakely replied with a thumbs-up emoji. I'd almost forgotten the man used emojis. On the way home from Guildford, I stopped at the supermarket and bought Layla's favorite strawberry yogurt and a bag of marshmallows. As I pushed my trolley past the canned goods aisle, I caught a glimpse of someone at the far end, short, wearing a baseball cap, a dark grey hoodie, half his face hidden under the brim. I didn't turn my head. I kept pushing the trolley forward, and when I reached the next aisle I crouched down to tie my shoelace, pretending, and glanced behind me. The figure had stopped at the end of the canned goods aisle, not moving, not picking up anything. I stood up, pushed the trolley slowly into the fresh produce section, then pulled out my phone and pretended to make a call, speaking in a normal tone. Yeah, I've just got to the supermarket. Came in through the main entrance, green trolley, dark blue coat. Are you coming to find me? Okay, meet you at the entrance. With that I turned and headed for the checkout. In my peripheral vision, the figure finally moved, disappearing into another aisle. I paid and loaded the bags into the car, sat in the driver's seat, locked the doors, and gripped the steering wheel until my heart rate settled. They had more than one person. Fletcher, the photographer, and now another one tailing me in the supermarket. Robert's friends were getting numerous. I started the car and drove home, keeping an eye on the mirrors the whole way. No one followed. When I arrived, Leo came out from the window to help carry the shopping into the kitchen, lowering his voice. Layla's awake from her nap, drawing, everything's fine. How did it go? I told him the new developments. His expression changed from concern to something heavier, like lead sinking to the bottom of water. Clara, if your father really has Layla written into that offshore trust. He didn't finish, but I knew what he meant. That's why I need to move fast, I said. Blakely has already applied for a prohibition order against Fletcher. Once it's signed, Robert's assessment evidence is dead. Meanwhile, the restraining order I filed is still going through. It'll take about 1 to 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, I need to make sure Robert and Margaret can't get anywhere near Layla. Leo fetched 2 cans of Coke from the fridge, opened one and handed it to me. I took a sip. The cold, fizzy bubbles went down my throat and cleared my head. Outside the window, the light was fading. The apple tree's leaves rustled in the breeze. Layla ran in from the living room holding a drawing to show me. 3 ladybirds on a giant sunflower, laughing with mouths stretched to their ears. I praised her, and she happily ran back to color more. After dinner I put Layla to bed, then sat in the study going through Strachan's trust notes. I looked up the Luxembourg law firm. It was a small practice specializing in cross-jurisdictional family wealth structuring. I sent the name to my NCA contact and got a reply within 10 minutes. We've had dealings with them before, 2 cases involving international custody disputes and asset freezes. We'll need to go through formal mutual legal assistance. I can draft the request letter. I replied, please draft it. I'll cover the costs. After sending that, I leaned back in my chair, hands clasped behind my head, staring at a small crack in the ceiling. 25 minutes earlier I'd searched for Alistair Fletcher online and found that he had ties to several offshore security consultancies, one of which was registered in Jersey. The registration listed a director, Margaret Bennett. My mother. She was one of his employers. I took a screenshot of that entry and saved it to the Counter-Strike folder. The folder now had over a dozen entries: bank statements, audio logs, USB directory, Fletcher's assessment, Fletcher's company registration, the supermarket tail's half face. I'd since grabbed a screenshot from the store's CCTV, Luxembourg law firm information, trust summary, and the IP trace on Leo's forged email. Each one a fiber, and if you twisted enough fibers together you got a rope. My phone buzzed. Blakely, restraining order hearing confirmed for Wednesday. The supermarket tail's plate came back, registered to a security firm with the same address as Fletcher's Jersey company. We're working upwards. Lock everything tonight, call my private number if anything moves. I replied, will do. You get some rest too. I put the phone down and checked every door and window on the ground floor. I added a security chain to the front door and bolted the garden sliding doors. As I passed the living room, I glanced at the spare key replica from the evidence bag. I'd already changed the lock cylinder. That old key was now just a useless piece of metal, just like all the care they'd ever given me, once I'd seen it for what it was. I went upstairs and lay down next to Layla, holding her little hand, breathing slowly. Her palm was warm, the soft folds of her skin pressed against my fingertips, like a small animal still growing. Outside there was wind, occasionally a dog barked in the distance. The street gradually settled into the quiet of a weekend night. Monday morning, as I dropped Layla at school, Fiona called me over and said her husband Gary had seen the silver Vauxhall loitering nearby again over the weekend. It hadn't stopped, just cruised slowly past the junction. I thanked her and stood at the school gate for a moment, watching Layla's backpack disappear through the glass doors into the corridor. She didn't look back. She never looked back on school days. She always rushed eagerly towards the classroom, like a little bird drawn to a new day. I hoped she'd never need to. From the school I drove straight to my solicitor's office in Kingston. My family law solicitor was a woman named Singh, Indian British, small in stature, but formidable, renowned in court for her sharp tongue. She looked through my collated materials, pushed her glasses up on her head, and tapped Fletcher's assessment with her pen. This is worse than scrap paper, Clara. No practicing qualification, no consent from the subject, illegal collection methods, no ethics committee sign-off. On the day of the restraining order hearing, I'll tear this thing in half in front of the judge, and then ask Mrs. Margaret Bennett, which bank account did you use to pay £2,000 for this illegal report? I laughed. Singh laughed too, then became serious. But Robert's solicitor is Harold Pearson. You know him. He specializes in middle-class custody cases, and his best trick is dragging things out. He'll file endless extensions, objections, supplemental evidence demands. That trust fund of your father's is exactly for that, to exhaust you with litigation costs. I know, I said. That's why I need you to prepare an emergency motion for an interim no-contact order ahead of the restraining order decision. And decouple the trust issue from custody. Show the judge that Robert's financial arrangements are his own affair, and cannot be used as grounds for Layla should be with him. Singh scribbled notes, then looked up with a very appraising gaze. Clara, you're clearer-headed than 9 out of 10 clients I sit across from. Robert picked the wrong opponent. I quoted back at her. My mother taught me, why would a daughter who loves her family keep secrets? Now I'm giving her the answer. After I left the practice, while standing at a junction in Kingston waiting for the traffic light, my phone rang again. The display showed an unknown local number. I answered, and a young woman's voice, speaking quickly, said, Mrs. Bennett. This is Diana at Layla's school reception. Don't worry, Layla's fine, but a woman claiming to be your mother just called the school office, saying you had authorized her to pick up Layla for a temporary doctor's appointment. The school checked the list against your previous notification, and found she wasn't authorized, so we refused. However, the lady got quite upset on the phone, said you'd changed the arrangements without telling her. We thought you should know. My grip tightened on the phone. Thank you, Diana. You did exactly the right thing. From now on, any call or visit to the school in my parents' name must be refused. If anything else happens, call my mobile directly. Understood. Mrs. Bennett, would you like us to add a special note, something like a trigger for police involvement? Yes. If she appears in person at the school gate, call the police immediately and notify me. I hung up and stood under the red light, taking a deep breath. Margaret was so impatient that she'd called the school herself, without waiting for any reaction from me. This was a test, and a pressure tactic. She wanted to see how high and how strong I'd built the defenses. Her whole life she'd been testing my boundaries. Every time I drew a line, she'd nudge her toe across it bit by bit to see if I'd back away. This time I wouldn't. I didn't go straight home. I drove to Sergeant Blakely's station instead. He was waiting in his office with a new file on the desk, the supermarket CCTV stills and the security firm's associated records. He pushed the mouse and turned the screen towards me. Fletcher's Jersey Company has a subsidiary registered as Home Security Solutions, whose stated services include minor travel tracking and risk assessment consulting. In the past 6 months, 3 invoices from them were made out to Robert Bennett, totaling £12,000. Can those invoices serve as evidence of illegal surveillance? Yes, but we need to prove that the surveillance methods were carried out within the UK and against your will. We've already got the GPS, the photos, the audio. Link them together and we have a complete chain. Blakely pulled out a printed satellite image with a red circle marking my parents' house. Our tech team flew a drone over that area this morning and found a metal box in the back garden corner, separate from the tool shed, about 40 by 40 centimeters, with an antenna. We think it's a receiver. We're applying for a second search warrant today, should be approved tomorrow. Can I come along? Blakely thought for a moment. You can watch from the perimeter. But don't get close. Once we've finished collecting evidence, you can go in and see your parents' faces. He said it lightly, but I saw something different in his eyes. That old cop's accumulated disgust at certain dirty tricks. He'd seen too many cases where money and power crushed ordinary people. This time, he'd clearly picked a side. I left the station around 4 in the afternoon. The sky was gloomy and a light rain had started. I drove to pick up Layla, wearing my hood and waiting under the school's entrance canopy, staring at the overcast sky and the wet road. Layla ran out with an orange child's umbrella, shouting, "Mummy, in art today, I drew a big house. With an apple tree in front." I bent down and kissed her forehead, took her backpack, and walked her to the car. When I reached the car, I saw a white postcard tucked under the windscreen wiper. The rain had already soaked half of it, but the handwriting was clear. Again that elegant cursive, "Rainy day soup is the best. Mummy is waiting for you at home." I peeled it off, turned it over, and saw the return address printed in full for my parents' house, as if inviting a reply. I dropped it in the bin beside the car, strapped Layla into her car seat, and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, the rain was coming down in a fine curtain, shrouding the street in a grey-blue twilight. Layla hummed a school song in the back seat, mostly off-key. I hummed along with her, not too loud, not too soft, while the car radio played piano music on BBC Radio 2, and the wipers swept back and forth. Inside this car was a complete little world, clean, safe, and steered by me. However hard the rain beat outside, as long as I held the wheel, it could only fall on the glass. That night, after Layla was asleep, I sat in the study and began drafting my own statement. I titled it, "Factual Statement Regarding the Long-Term Emotional Control and Unlawful Surveillance by Robert and Margaret Bennett." I wrote slowly, starting from the time I'd hidden my UCAS form at 18, all the way to the phone call from school receptionist Diana that afternoon. Every ignored warning sign, every piece of control wrapped as care, every time she'd stood outside my door waiting for me to crack and surrender, I wrote it all. By the last line my fingers were numb, but I didn't stop. I printed it, signed it, and put it in an envelope. Tomorrow morning, this would be on Singh's desk. As I closed the laptop, the rain outside had stopped. A thin crescent moon peeked through the clouds, casting a pale light on the damp lawn. I stood by the window for a while, looking out. The street beyond the fence was dark, no parked cars, no figures. The whole Surrey residential area had gone quiet, save for the occasional low rumble of tires from the motorway in the distance. I knew that as soon as dawn broke, a new round would begin. Robert would keep using his money and his solicitor to stall. Margaret would keep writing her gentle cards, pretending there was still room for compromise. Fletcher and his Jersey company would keep hopping around the grey areas. And the baseball-capped man in the supermarket. Maybe he'd changed hats and gone to another supermarket, still watching from some crowd. But so what? I had the recordings, the photos, the bank statements, the drone image of the receiver, the school's defenses, Singh's courtroom demolition skills, Blakely's full case file, the NCA's technical support, and Strachan's trust leads. I held a whole hand of cards, sitting at the table opposite two old people, who had spent a lifetime hiding their hand, and they were slowly revealing the tricks they thought would scare me off. I turned from the window and walked back to the bedroom. As I passed Layla's door, I listened. She turned over in her sleep and mumbled something vague. Ladybird flew away. I pushed the door open, tucked her kicked-off blanket back over her, and sat on the edge of the bed looking at her for a while. Moonlight fell on one bare foot poking out from under the covers, the toes curled like a tiny shell. I gently straightened them, then stood up, closed the door, and went back to my room. There was a whole day's work ahead tomorrow. And the day after. Wednesday's hearing, whether the restraining order would be granted depended on Singh's performance and the judge's inclinations. And after that, if Robert formally filed a custody suit in the family court, it could be a long, months-long battle. But I wasn't afraid of a long battle. What gets worn down are old ropes, the new rope stays in my hands. I turned off the light and stared at the ceiling in the dark, breathing slowly. The house made all the little noises that old houses make, wood contracting, pipes ticking, wind humming over the eaves. They used to sound unsettling, now they sounded like background noise. Like the ambient sounds of a chess game, I was destined to win. I closed my eyes. Leo still owed me, but at least he'd held the line today. He'd cleaned the whole house, cooked Layla's dinner, ironed her school uniform and hung it up, filled the fridge with weekend supplies. He hadn't brought up the fake email again, but he'd added new locks to all the garage windows and resecured the loose fence panels in the back garden. He was filling the pit with actions. I turned on my side and listened to Layla's faint breathing through the thin wall, like a thin thread connecting to my chest. I wouldn't let anyone cut that thread, no matter how many trust documents, how many fancy lawyer business cards, or how much for your own good cursive they carried. The rain started again, pattering faintly against the bedroom window. I drifted into sleep within that sound, still holding my phone, screen up, Blakely's number on speed dial. In my dream nothing happened, just a wide green lawn under an apple tree, Layla crouching down catching ladybirds, and me crouching beside her. She looked up and smiled at me, missing a front tooth, the gap showing when she laughed. I said, "Don't show your teeth when you laugh," and she said, "But mummy, when I laugh I like to open my mouth as wide as I can." I woke up. The sky outside was just beginning to lighten, the pale grey-white of a Tuesday morning filtering through the curtains. My phone lay quietly on the pillow, no new messages. I sat up, threw off the covers, and put my feet on the floor to start a new day. Tuesday morning under the grey-white light. I stood at the kitchen counter making coffee, listening to Leo upstairs struggling to braid Layla's hair. She was wearing her ladybird costume from Halloween again, because she said Halloween isn't over yet. Leo fumbled with the elastic bands while Layla giggled, her laughter rolling down the stairs and hitting me in the back. I carried my coffee to the front window and lifted a corner of the blind. Across the street, under the plane tree, it was empty. The wet pavement glistened after the rain, a delivery bicycle went past with a ding, and a high-vis postman pushed mail through Diana's letterbox next door. Everything looked as normal as a bleached backdrop, which made me more uneasy. Robert and Margaret had made no move since the school phone call. No cards, no postcards, no silver Vauxhall creeping past the corner. That silence was more unsettling than their aggression. They were like two old cats crouching in the grass, claws tucked in, waiting for something. After dropping Layla off, Leo put his car keys on the hall console and said, "I've taken the day off. Singh called and wants us to come in at 10 for a final pre-hearing review. You go, I'll finish up the back garden work." I looked at him. "You're not coming to court." "I will, but Singh said she wants to go over the evidence chain with you first. She mentioned," he paused, "that your father's side submitted additional materials to the court yesterday afternoon. Singh hasn't got a copy yet, but she heard from the clerk that the document title includes the phrase supplementary health assessment." The keys in my hand felt cold. "Fletcher wrote something new." "Don't know. That's why Singh wants to talk to you alone first." I nodded and didn't ask further. I drove to Kingston. Singh's office smelled strongly of ginger tea. She had the window cracked open, letting cold air mix with the tea scent in a strangely bracing way. She pushed a fresh printout across the desk, my statement, still warm from the machine, covered in fluorescent highlighter marks. "Well written," she said. "In 20 years of practice, I've seen too many people who've been crushed by their families either right in fury or in self-doubt. Yours reads like a geological cross-section, cutting through decades of rock layer by layer. The judge will like it. Before I could thank her, she pulled another thin sheet from the drawer, her expression darkening. That supplementary material Robert filed yesterday. I got hold of a copy. Look. It was a new psychological state assessment, signed by someone called Herbert Mackenzie, a title-reading registered practitioner, Royal College of Psychiatrists. The conclusions were much more professional than Fletcher's, measured, neutral, but the direction was the same. Subject Bennett displays persistently high anxiety levels in the context of separation from her birth family, which may impair parenting judgment under acute stress. Recommends periodic third-party custodial monitoring. I stared at that name for 10 seconds. What's this man's connection to Fletcher? Singh turned her screen towards me. Search results showed that Herbert Mackenzie and Fletcher had belonged to the same organization 5 years ago, a firm called Odyssey Psychological Services, which later dissolved, and they'd gone their separate ways. Fletcher had no license, Mackenzie did, but his record showed 2 complaints, one for disclosing assessment details to a third party without consent, and another for incomplete cross-regional practice authorization. He writes reports for money, anything the client wants, Singh said. This report isn't admissible as direct evidence, but it's enough to plant a seed of doubt in the judge's mind. Robert doesn't need to win with this, he just needs the judge to think this mother needs watching. Once court-ordered supervision is in place, Layla's daily arrangements are subject to court oversight, and Margaret can step in as supervisory support. I took a deep breath and folded the sheet into my bag. Can the connection between Mackenzie and Fletcher be used for cross-examination? Yes, but it'll take time to subpoena him. I'd rather hold that card for now. See if the other side brings Mackenzie up themselves. If they cite his report in court, I'll tear him apart. Has he ever met you? If not, that's unprofessional conduct, and the Royal College of Psychiatrists takes a very dim view of that. I nodded. Singh stood up and handed me a cup of ginger tea, patting my shoulder. Today, do one thing. Put together a schedule of Layla's activities for the coming week, including who picks her up, where she goes, and what time she gets home, as detailed as possible. When the judge asks you how do you normally care for your child, answer with that schedule. It's worth more than any assessment report. As I left the practice, my mind was already racing through tomorrow's hearing strategy. My phone buzzed. Blakely, second search warrant granted. Operation at 2 p.m. If you want to watch from the perimeter, be at the Wybridge Junction at 1:45. Don't bring anyone else. I replied, okay, and drove home. On the way I stopped at the supermarket for milk and bread. The checkout queue was snail-slow. An elderly lady in front of me was arguing with the cashier about an expired discount voucher. I waited patiently, my eyes scanning the snack rack beside the till, Layla's favorite gummy bears. I grabbed 2 packets and dropped them in the basket. As I came out of the supermarket, I noticed a man in a grey overcoat standing by a pillar in the car park, talking on his phone. He was facing my direction, but his gaze wasn't focused on me. He ended the call, turned, and walked unhurriedly to a black Nissan, got in, and drove off. I didn't catch the number plate, but I noticed one detail, a small silver badge pinned to his lapel, circular, resembling the logo on Fletcher's jersey company. I loaded the shopping into the boot, sat in the driver's seat, and quickly sketched the badge on my phone to send to Blakely, then started the car. Everything looked calm in the mirror, but I knew I was standing at the center of the board, and someone was moving on every square. At 1:45, I parked on a familiar corner in Wybridge, 2 streets away from my parents' Georgian house. Blakely sent me a location, and told me to stay in the car. I switched off the engine and watched the grey brick building through the windscreen. The window of what used to be my childhood room had its beige curtains drawn, and on the sill sat Margaret's red geranium, its colour startling. 2 unmarked police cars glided up from the end of the street and stopped at the front gate. Blakely and 3 plainclothes officers got out and rang the bell. From 2 blocks away, I couldn't hear what they said, but from my angle I could see Robert appear in the doorway, wearing that dark green Barber jacket, standing there like an old tree rooted in the ground. Margaret didn't appear. The officers went in. About 15 minutes later, I saw someone emerge from the garden side, a tech officer carrying a metal briefcase walking in. Blakely texted, "Metal box found, antenna intact, containing receiver module and memory card." Also found a newly printed guardianship application form in the study, filled out, but not posted, dated yesterday. I gripped the phone, knuckles white. Yesterday. They'd been filling out that form right up to the day before my hearing. They never stopped. Another 20 minutes passed, and Blakely messaged again, "Your father asked to make a phone call. We allowed it in our presence. He called your mother's mobile. She answered and said she was dealing with personal matters. She knew we were in the house, but she didn't come back. We couldn't find her on the premises. Margaret wasn't home. Where was she?" I immediately called Layla's school. Receptionist Diana answered, and I said, "Has anyone come to pick up Layla today under any pretext?" "No, Mrs. Bennett. Everything's normal. Layla's in music class." I breathed a little easier, but my heart was still racing. "I'll still pick her up after school. If her grandmother appears anywhere near the school, follow the procedure we discussed." "Understood." I hung up and stared at the black front door of my parents' house. Margaret wasn't home, then where was she? At her solicitor's. Getting a new report from Mackenzie. Or somewhere closer to Layla, testing the edges of the defenses I'd put up. I couldn't wait any longer. I texted Blakely that I was leaving, started the engine, and turned towards Layla's school. Halfway there, I called Fiona and asked if she could pick up Layla after school and keep her at her house for an hour. I had a temporary engagement. Fiona readily agreed and even offered to feed her dinner. I said no, just an hour. After I'd dropped Layla at Fiona's, I drove straight to Singh's office and gave her everything, the copy of Mackenzie's report, Margaret's disappearance, and the badge on the grey overcoat man. Singh listened in silence for a few seconds, then pulled out a tablet from under her desk and opened a file she'd compiled on Robert's solicitor Harold Pearson's litigation strategy. "Pearson has a habit," Singh said, "of arranging a last-minute settlement attempt in the 24 hours before a custody hearing. Usually he sends the matriarch of the client's side, your mother, to have an informal contact with the opposing party. The purpose is to record the other party's emotional outburst or aggressive attitude, to use as evidence of conduct in court the next day. Your mother being away from home today, very likely she's out doing exactly that." The last piece of the puzzle clicked into place. "She's going to come to me today. In person. Very likely. Near your home, your office, or the school. Be prepared. When she shows up, remember, don't argue with her, and don't stay silent. Ask her, what do you want to talk about, and let her speak. The less you say, the better. Her only purpose in coming to you is to make you lose control." I thanked Singh and left. The sky had darkened and the streetlights were coming on one by one. Kingston's streets were thinning out. As I walked back to the car park, my phone rang. The caller ID was my mother Margaret's number. I answered and put it to my ear. "Clara." Her voice sounded exactly as usual, gentle, composed, carrying that everyday tone of "it's cold outside," put on another layer. "You're in Kingston, aren't you? I saw your car. The coffee shop opposite, the table in the corner by the window, I'll be waiting." I stood in the middle of the car park and looked around. Across the road there was indeed a small independent cafe, warm yellow light spilling from its windows. At a table by the window sat a woman in a camel-colored cashmere coat, her grey hair swept into a low bun, an untouched cup of tea in front of her. She raised a hand and gave a small wave in my direction, like an old friend greeting someone familiar. I gripped the phone and crossed the road slowly, pushing open the cafe door. A bell chimed. There were only 2 or 3 other tables occupied. Margaret looked up at me with a perfectly curated smile, the corners of her mouth lifted just the right amount, the creases around her eyes arranging themselves into kind folds. She patted the chair opposite and said, "Sit. It won't take long." I sat down across from her, didn't take off my coat, kept my bag on my lap, facing her. The cafe smelled of toasted bread and espresso, background jazz from the 90s played, all cozy like a scene from a life that should belong to someone else. "Mum," I said, "you made the police come back empty-handed." She laughed and reached out to touch the rim of her teacup. "Your father enjoys handling those situations. I don't compete with him. I just wanted to have a cup of tea with you today." She pulled out a folded sheet of paper from her bag, the edges sealed with the familiar Bennett family wax crest, dark red, with an embossed bird in flight. "Tomorrow's the hearing, and I wanted to give you one last choice. You don't have to answer right away. Take it home and read it slowly." I didn't unfold the paper. I left it flat on the table, my hand pressing it down. "Just tell me directly." "I'm listening." Margaret leaned slightly forward, lowering her voice, as if telling a bedtime story. "Clara, your father and I aren't young anymore. Everything we've accumulated in life, the house, the trust, the social connections, will eventually go to Layla. We just want to make sure there's a clear legal channel, so that those things won't be lost if anything happens to your marriage. This isn't about taking your child away. It's about having a safety net for you. Think about it, if Leo's job ever really does go wrong, how will your family get by? On your part-time illustration fees." Her words were soft as feathers, but every feather hid a needle. She deliberately mentioned Leo's job, hinting that she believed the fake email was still working, even though Hutchinson had internally resolved the matter. Margaret clearly thought that knife was still stuck in Leo. I took my hand off the paper and leaned back. "Are you finished?" She paused for half a second, probably not expecting me to be so calm. She quickly resumed her smile. "Yes. Take it home and read it. Mummy just wants what's best for you." I stood up and folded the paper into my pocket. "Mum, will I see you in court tomorrow?" She took a sip of her tea, unhurried. "Yes. I'll be in the public gallery. Your father has the best solicitor. I just want to watch over you from the side." "Fine." I turned and walked out. As I pushed the cafe door, the bell chimed again. I didn't look back. Back in the car, I unfolded the paper. Only 2 lines, typed, no handwritten cursive. "Withdraw your restraining order application. We will withdraw all guardianship documents. Layla will continue to live with you, but spend Sunday dinner at Wybridge every weekend. Condition, you must cut all contact with Strachan, and have Sergeant Blakely cease investigating the trust account." I stared at those 2 lines for a full minute. They knew about Strachan. They knew I'd met with him. They also knew the direction of the police investigation. This letter wasn't a reconciliation offer, it was a turned-over card. They were telling me, "I can see every card in your hand, and I'm offering you a way out, take it or leave it." I took a photo and sent it to Singh and Blakely, then started the engine and drove to Fiona's to pick up Layla. She was sweaty and happy from chasing her friends in the garden. When she saw me, she ran over holding a pumpkin biscuit. I crouched down and caught her, lifting her to feel her weight. She whispered in my ear, "Mummy, can we go on the carousel tomorrow?" "Tomorrow Mummy has something important to do, but I'll pick you up early in the afternoon, okay?" She nodded and shoved half the biscuit into my mouth. It was slightly burnt, but sweet. That night, Singh's reply was only one sentence: "Tomorrow in court, you don't back down on anything." I've already included the trust issue in the exhibit list. That letter from your mother will be opened in court.